Hi, I'm Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center, and this is our weekly update about what's going on in the state legislature and what bills are passing that are going to affect our lives. Also, what bills have died because they passed some deadline. So I'll summarize some of those. I'll be talking about what's happening with emergency powers, the latest on the parental rights repeal bill that's working its way through, some news about the federal Department of Education and how it's going to affect us here in the state. Also, some population trends that are happening with states across the country that could affect us. And then finally wrapping up with the big issue for the legislature, and that is passing a new budget. And new details are coming out about that. But first off, let me point out that we are in the 69th day of a 105-day legislative session. The deadline for the cutoff for bills being passed in each house has passed, and the next cutoff date is April 2nd, and that's the date on which a bill has to be passed out of committee in the opposite house to still be considered alive. And of course, budget and fiscal bills have a separate deadline that provides a little more time. And with that, I'd also like to remind all our viewers to like and subscribe to our video service. Our viewership has increased tremendously in just the last 6 or 8 weeks or so. We're really encouraged by that. And also leave a comment if you feel so moved. We love reading through the comments. I look at all of them. I pick up a lot of good ideas actually from our viewers. So I encourage you to do that. And now jumping into the issues, one is I'll revisit something that I gave an update on in the past and what happened with this bill, and that's HB 1938. And that was create a commission to redesign the state flag. That bill appears to be dead for the session. And so I have my sign here that we can keep George Washington on the state flag for at least another year. That bill appears to be dead for the year. The next bill is SB 5434. That's an emergency powers reform bill. And this bill was really moving positively. It had a lot of bipartisan support. Republicans are all on board with this to limit the emergency powers of the governor after the experience we went through with Jay Inslee. Nobody thinks that we should repeat that again, even our current new governor, Governor Ferguson, and yet that bill appears to have died as well. And oddly, and this happens with the legislative process, is that it was amended in committee by the leadership to the point where even the people who supported the bill no longer supported it. The Republican ranking member on the committee even pointed out that the bill is now weaker than current law. So this is a common tactic that's done in legislatures and in Congress, which is kind of amending a bill to death by weakening it so much that even its own supporters won't vote for it anymore. And that's what happened in this case. It's an odd thing to happen with an issue that's not that controversial and has a lot of bipartisan support. However, Governor Ferguson has moved boldly himself and announced that he will limit his own emergency powers going forward, and that while he's governor, he would not exercise emergency powers for more than 60 days. Or 90 days rather, until he hears from leadership in the legislature, and that in any case, he would seek legislative review after 120 days. That's fairly generous. Other states have tighter limitations than that, but still, it's a big improvement over the 975 days of emergency power that Jay Inslee exercised just a few years ago. So we're encouraged by that, but ultimately, it is the legislature that needs to change the law. We compliment Governor Ferguson for tackling this on his own, but we really need the legislature at some point to take care of this problem. Hopefully, they'll revisit it next year. The next bill I want to talk about is HB 1296. This is the repeal of the Parental Rights Initiative. Again, sponsors say they're not repealing it. They're just adjusting, modifying, changing. And when you hear language like that, it's like, well, you're not strengthening it, so you're only going in one direction, and that is to weaken parent rights in the public schools. That has been controversial in our state for years. An example of direct democracy was Initiative 2081, which the legislature passed last year, and we thought that that had taken care of this problem, locked in 15 parental rights in relation to public education, and now this bill is starting to roll those back. Again, you always have to look at language to try to see what's going on. The sponsors of it say the bill is going to modify Initiative 2081. Modify actually means repeal, because why would you change it if you weren't happy with the way that it was? The second thing that sponsors say is that there's no reason why parental rights and student rights in the school shouldn't, quote, coexist. So again, this creates an equality between, student rights and parent rights. And again, parents understand that there is no equality there. Parents are responsible for lovingly raising their children. They are looking for support and allies from public schools, from neighbors, community, other adults, friends, other family members. Believe me, anybody that can help with supporting and raising kids is welcomed by parents. Anybody who's working against that is something that the parents don't need. And that is what is leading the controversy here. The schools seem to be positioning themselves that they are working against the parents. And by the sponsors using language like, well, the student right should coexist with the parent right, implies a natural contradiction right there. And again, parents don't see that. The parent's interest is the children's interests. Those are the same thing. And why should a state law work against that? There's a Senate version of this bill as well, and those two will have to be reconciled at some point. But they are both, the House has already passed one, and now the Senate is working on their version, and we'll see how that develops from there. The next issue is something that's happening at the national level. President Trump signed an order ending the Department of Education. That's on a completely different track in Washington, D.C. That, again, will have to be something that Congress has to deal with. A president can't do that by himself. But where it affects us is our own education expert, Vicki Murray, has literally written the book on this topic. Her book is called The Failure, the Federal Miseducation of Children. And she walks through how federal involvement with public education has not helped children. We've seen the trend in this state. There's a direct correlation, I should say a negative correlation, between the amount of money that is spent and outcomes for children. So as we spend more money per student, and we're at the highest levels ever today, approaching $20,000 per student, but test scores are lower, math, English, science, are all showing that children are learning less, even though we're putting in more resources. The ending of the Federal Department of Education, if that's ratified by Congress, will refocus, and this is what Vicki argues, that our efforts on state and local support for the schools, a focus on academics and learning, which is definitely would rebuild confidence in the schools, and that key federal programs, the administration has made it clear that funding for those is not going to end. So special education funding, student loans for college kids, those will continue. Protection of civil rights for students through the Justice Department will also continue. So we don't see those being dismantled. But what's important to us, again, is this focus on state and local control of education. And in Washington State, we believe that the whole system should focus on academics, student learning, and to use money wisely, not just pour more money into a system that's already failing. Next is what I did some research on population trends because Americans are shifting around the country. I wanted to see how Washington State fits into that. The latest U.S. Census information shows that some states are losing population. Commenters call this the red shift, that blue states are losing population and red states are gaining population. So California, Illinois, New York, and Oregon have all lost population in the last few years. California lost 100,000 people. Oregon is part of this trend too. And the result of that is a change in congressional representation. So by 2030, California, Illinois, New York, Oregon, a few others are already slated to lose seats. Oregon will probably lose one seat at least. Whereas other states are gaining. So Texas could gain as many as 4 seats. Florida might gain 3 seats. But in our region, it looks like Idaho will gain at least 1 congressional seat, while Oregon is losing 1. So where does that put Washington State? So far, our population is steady and even increasing slightly. So if we maintain that trend for the next several years, then our 10-person congressional delegation in the House will stay the same. However, if we join the trend of other blue states, we could be looking at losing a congressional seat at some point. And that's just something I think we should keep an eye on over the next several years. And for our state leaders to think about what policies may be driving people out of the state or discouraging them from coming here in the first place. So it's always the governance of a state either attracts or repels business investment, jobs, or people moving, looking for a better life, better schools, better housing. Those are all factors that people sort of shop for among the 50 states. And this trend among blue and red states is concerning, certainly for California and those states. And Washington State may get caught up at that at some point, and we think our state leaders should be aware of that. The next issue is the big one. What's happening with the budget? The main job of the legislature this year is to pass another 2-year budget for the 25-27 cycle. Washington State's fiscal year starts on July 1st, and so the legislature needs to get that all in place by July 1st, and in order to avoid a government shutdown. They are due to wrap up in April, so they should make it in plenty of time. But right now, the details of different budget proposals are starting to come out. The Democrats have offered a major budget package that includes a lot of new taxes. They have new revenue ideas, which would add $17 billion in new taxes over the next 4 years. Some examples of those are a 5% tax on payroll expenses above a certain salary level. This is the same as Seattle's executive payroll tax that's in place right now. It's an example of how policy ideas are sort of germinated in Seattle, and then they're picked up by Democrats in the state legislature and extended to every community statewide. That's an example of one of those. Another one is a repeal on the 1% limit on property tax collections, and there are several others as well. A wealth tax, which I'll comment on that in just a second. But Senator Peterson, the Democratic leader in the Senate, what he pointed out is he's trying to make the tax code more fair, as they put it, fewer regressive taxes. That's fine. Their solution for that is to pass new taxes on the rich, quote unquote. And I'm always suspicious of that because the definition of rich tends to drop down until it approaches middle income levels. This is what happened with the federal income tax. It started out as a 1% tax on the rich, and now we are all paying it. So when I hear that rhetoric, it's a signal that new taxes are coming for you. Specifically, Senator Peterson said that we need new taxes, and this is a quote, so that extremely wealthy people can keep enjoying a tax break. Well, there is no defined tax break. What he seems to be indicating is if we're not collecting your money, then you're getting a break. So that kind of authoritative language where people in government are like, we don't like the fact that you have too much money and we're gonna take some of it. And that's always a concern when it comes to fairness and equal treatment under the law. The wealth tax, as I mentioned before, would be a tax on people at very high income levels, over $50 million, for example, in assets and investments. And most people are like, fine, only a few thousand people in the state are going to pay that. Why does it affect me? Here's why. Number one, those taxes tend to expand. As I just mentioned, before you know it, we'll all be paying some kind of wealth tax. But number two, the definition of a wealth tax is just a tax on what you have. If you own it, they're going to tax it. And that is different than a tax that's on income, profits, a transaction, what tax lawyers call a nexus. You engage in some activity economically, and then you pay a tax for that. There's a certain logic to that. At least it's an opt-in. A wealth tax is like imposing an annual percentage tax on a savings account where money is just sitting there, and the government decides that they're going to take 2 or 3% of it, or 5% every single year. If that asset doesn't grow, it could be taxed down to zero. So in principle, the idea of a wealth tax, even though it's pitched at the very wealthiest people, who cares? They're going to pay, not me. And there's this kind of cynicism of soaking other people in an envious kind of way and thinking that it doesn't affect everybody else. So I think there's a warning sign in that approach. There is a positive sign in what the Democrats are proposing is a slight, I mean, I'll give them credit for what they're doing, okay? They're proposing a 0.5 percent cut in the sales tax rate. That would kick in 2027, a couple of years from now, and that would cut the sales tax from 6.5% to 6%. As many people across Washington state know, if you live in the Seattle area, for example, that the sales tax, state and local added together, is over 10%. That really hurts retail. It hurts local small businesses. It hurts neighborhood shopping areas, things like that. And the tax code in a lot of ways is out of date, but a small cutback in the sales tax is welcome. That would benefit everybody, including low-income people. It would make life more affordable in our state. My only criticism of it is that why the small ball? I mean, it's such a narrow, symbolic kind of cut. Most people would hardly even feel it. One analyst calculated that if you spent $10,000 a year on consumer goods, you might get a $50 tax break. So it's moving in the right direction. That's positive, but maybe they could up that to like a full percentage point or 1.5%. So that would really have a stimulating effect on the economy and let people keep more of their own money. Republicans have an alternative. They are proposing a budget that would provide a 5% increase in the next 2-year budget with no new taxes. And what Republicans are taking advantage of is the fact that state revenues are increasing without any changes in the tax code through natural growth in the economy. The state is taking in plenty of money with no policy changes at all. They estimate that the OFM, officials in the government, estimate that the state will take in $10 billion in additional revenue over the next 4 years under current policy. No new taxes, no sharper financial burden on the public. Republicans got that report and they folded it into their own budget. That would result in an operating budget in the next 2-year cycle of $75.6 billion under what the Republicans are proposing. That's at least $3 or $4 billion more than what we're spending now. Increases in education, increases in social services. And this is the right-wing Republican budget. So when even the Republicans are proposing a big increase in spending and doing it under current law, that indicates how much money the state is taking in and that there's no need to add new taxes. I will point out, as far as background, that Jay Inslee added 22 new taxes to our tax code. I just described a number that the Democrats want to add that would increase that number. And yet it all appears to be unnecessary because we could fund current services and have increases with the money that the state is collecting now. So I'll wrap up there and I'll be back in the future with another update.